Okay, so thanks for joining us, everybody. Let's get started. First of all, for some of you, this might be your first session you're attending on the Virtual Risk Management Forum. So a warm welcome from me. We are holding this forum to help you enhancing and improving your enterprise risk management functions, as well as covering uncertain and unpredictable global events. I'm Patrick Schweiger from Turnkey, and I'll be your host for today. Many of you already know Turnkey, but for those that don't, Turnkey is a specialized risk management application and cybersecurity company. We are providing business consulting, implementation, and managed service to help customers safeguard their application environment on both sides, SAP and non-SAP. We've collected a few questions before today's sessions, and we will run through this at the end. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment on this page and we will get back later on you. So I'm now going to introduce our special guest for today, Michael Hegner. He's the Senior Director at SAP Centers of Excellence for GSC. He has over 19 years of experience in enterprise business solution. During his career, he has repeatedly explored how software can help address complex business requirements. And for more than 10 years, Michael has worked with many global organizations to chart their course for corporate governance, enterprise risk management, and almost all GSC areas. In both ways, America as well as Europe. So I think we're all now on the same page. Michael, if you're ready, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Patrick, for the introduction, and welcome also from my side. So I'm here today to present to you on the topic of integrated risk controls and audit management, specifically for the time of the next normal. And the agenda that I had in mind really has 4 chapters, if you will. The first one is really to look into the objectives for the next normal and how you as an organization can prepare for that transformed world. The second chapter will then specifically dive deep into integrated risk controls and audit management for that next normal and illustrate how change means a shift in focus, also a shift in focus in these GRC practices. And I want to give some very practical examples how we support you there. Followed in the third chapter by a customer example and also by information on key accelerators that could get you there. And then we want to wrap up and, as like Patrick said, leave you with a few key thoughts to take home and some questions and answers as well. So with that, let's look at the objectives for the next normal. And as always, such a list could never be complete, so bear with me. But as regional reopenings from complete or partial shutdown are happening now in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, organizations are scrambling to develop and enact operational restart plans. And navigating this dynamic landscape under normal circumstances can be difficult, but in the face of an ongoing pandemic, it's extremely difficult to say the least. There is no one-size-fits-all playbook, to be very clear from the beginning, on how to best adapt to the reality of the operational complications that come with mitigating COVID-19 risks and protecting your workforce, while also producing in a way that makes business sense. But there are tools and there are guidelines that can serve as a strong foundation to drive operational readiness. And I want to share a few of those thoughts that we also learned from directly engaging with customers. So what you can see here, as I said, is obviously a non-exhaustive list of possible restart objectives. For example, for a manufacturer, if you look from left to right across the different processes from supply chain all the way to sales. On the supply process, your objectives as a company might include to maintain appropriate inventory levels to restart the production. It may, of course, also include ensuring that outsourced processes are really available. And on a more longer term horizon, you may wonder about and have objectives on the flexibility and agility of your supply chain, which is needed for a rapid adoption of new sourcing strategies. And of course, there will be many more objectives on the supply side. On the manufacturing side, or in more general terms, on your operations side, for non-manufacturers, your objectives may include something like managing the impact of the shutdown on your equipment and on the learning curve of your employees. It may also include objectives to update work instructions to reflect the current state. Maybe you use an alternate process, or maybe you have to change the sequence of your work steps. And of course, again, there will be many more objectives specific to your business, to your product, and to your production process. On the customer demand and on the sales side, your objectives may include the following. On the short term, obviously, you want to reevaluate the open orders, identify the ones that are still valid and need to be fulfilled. And then, of course, another objective is to meet those immediate customer demands as quickly as possible. But on a longer term horizon, you probably also need to prepare for a demand shift and worst case, also prepare for the risk of a recession. And again, the list here is much longer. On the strategic planning side, your objectives might include the identification of new and meaningful offerings that add value to your customers, to understand the changing market conditions, especially around consolidations, demand shifts, etc. And most importantly, I think, provide the transparency and reliability to all your stakeholders and ultimately protect your brand. And again, there will be many more objectives. Now, across all of that, we have a few processes that also have key objectives. First and foremost, I think everybody's thinking about that, is the financials process, and there, of course, providing the liquidity that your business needs. But then also there may be other objectives like determining the fair value on your assets, especially if factories are closed or if your air fleet is grounded or whatever have you. You may have to have objectives about material impairments on intangible assets and goodwill, and of course also reevaluate the value of your investment securities. So there is many things and objectives in the financial areas, and again, the list is non-exhaustive. And last but not least, I also want to talk about HR and specifically the workforce availability. Top of mind, of course, here is the health. And not only the physical health, but more and more companies are worrying also about the mental health with a lot of work remotely and work from home. But then also the re-education and retraining of your staff. The pandemic may have forced you into new ways of doing things. You may have to restructure. You may have fewer people doing the same job as before. So a more varied job for each individual that they need to be trained in. And so forth. And last but not least, also preparing and continuing to support your workforce with the remote work, which I think will stay to a certain extent. Now, as I said, in each area, this is non-exhaustive. There could be many, many more objectives. But each of these objectives, of course, has an equally long list of risks that stand in the way of achieving those objectives. And again, I can't be exhaustive here, but just to illustrate what I mean, if we look at the supply chain, then of course, you may have some critical suppliers, especially smaller suppliers that provide unique components that suddenly go out of business. You may quickly have to find new suppliers, and there, of course, you need to build the trust of the suppliers. So you need to screen them. Are they on sanctioned lists? Are they on adverse media lists? And sign them up. And if you change your suppliers, you may also change the sourcing country. So you need to look at the financial impact. Are the goods, the raw or semi-finished goods, crossing border lines? Are there tariffs and duties that will impact your profitability? So you see there's a lot of risks that stand in the way of achieving those supply chain objectives. Likewise, if you look on the manufacturing side, I don't want to go into all the details, but every process change will require that you evaluate the risk that then is in that process and specifically in that change, and that you will also need to develop controls to mitigate those risks. On the sales side, there is a number of risks as well, again, non-exhaustive, of course, but it will probably start with you re-evaluating the customer credit that you're extending and identify which customer should get which credit limit in the post-pandemic time. Then you will need to look at any distribution risks that may keep you from getting the goods in time to your customers. And ultimately, you will need to think about your cash collection and whether you will have delays in collecting customer cash and an increasing day sales outstanding KPI, and ways of how you can expedite the cash collection. And of course, I pointed it out already on the previous slide, there's lots of strategic risks, as well as there are a lot of financial risks, which I think you're more than aware of. So I may just want to add one particular risk on the financial side, that now with a lot of people working remotely, you need to close your books reliably and accurately. And can you do that remotely? Are your processes and are your people prepared to do that? And on the workforce side, of course, I also alluded to a lot of risks already on the previous slide that obviously could impact the achievement of these objectives, but I want to add two more. One is, again, how can you operate across the board remotely? Do you have the automation in place that will allow you to do that? And with a lot of people working remotely, in other words, outside your corporate network, if you Google that, there is a lot of pundits out there who are saying that the risk of a cyber attack has dramatically increased. And so you need to watch that cyber risk as well. So with that, let me summarize all of that. What we can learn from here is that there is a lot of change. And in times of change, we have an increased number of risks. And we need very good transparency into those risks, but not just the risks, but also the transparency into how we mitigate them. And to put that in sort of into one picture, I would say we've always been trained to manage our business by objectives. I don't know a single organization that isn't managed by objectives. And at the highest level, maybe we've just added one objective, namely the restart in a way that makes business sense. And of course, we always have had the tools to manage according to these objectives. But what we should overlook is that there always have been, and right now in the time of change, even more so, there is lots of risks out there that could impact the achievement of our objectives. But there is also a best practice, an integrated risk controls and audit management, often also known as a 3 lines of defense best practice, that gives us visibility into the risks and into the mitigations and what the independent assurance is saying about that. So what I'm trying to say is that these are 2 sides of the same coin. If we want to be successful, if we want to restart successfully, we need the objectives, but we also need to look at the risks and what we're doing about them. And that's the risk-adjusted management. So with that, I want to go deeper now and give you very tangible examples of the tools and guidelines that can help you steer through that restart. And I want to start with the risk management process. Obviously, it's an enterprise-wide process that spans everything from planning the risk management for your organization, identifying all the risks, including the newly arising risks from the pandemic and the restart, and analyzing them, as well as responding to them, and of course, continuously monitoring. And I want to jump on that last point, that monitoring point, because we provide the ways of not only assessing risks, but also grabbing information from the underlying business system in an automatic fashion. We call that key risk indicators, and automatically alert key stakeholders in your business about a onset or development of a specific risk, and of course then trigger the responsive actions. And now that risk information shouldn't stand alone. If you remember my 2 sides of a coin slide, I think the information should really be embedded in the business context. And I want to quickly show you here a demo of a so-called digital boardroom. Here we are looking at a sample company, let's say. You see a number of business indicators that we're grabbing from various business systems, like the operating income or the video conferencing traffic that's currently going on. And you could imagine any kind of business information on that digital boardroom. But we're also grabbing from our enterprise risk and controls repository the risk information. And we see a 12% increase in the risk exposure this quarter over the previous quarter. So all risks together, they have increased on average by 12%. Now, if I drill into that, let's say I'm a board member or I'm a senior manager and I'm preparing for a management meeting, I want to know more detail. And I can see here for my company, the 6 strategic objectives that we've chosen. And you see how the risks have impacted each of the 6 objectives. The worst impact here is not on ensure worker safety, but it is in this example, specifically on safeguard business systems from unauthorized access. And I see that quarter over quarter here, I have a jump in almost 15% risk exposure of all the risks that impact that objective. And if I wanted to know more detail, I can drill into that on my third screen here. For that particular business objective, I see the risk categories here, or the groupings of risks that contribute to that increase. I can see which organizations are actually affected by these risks. Not every organization is impacted the same way. And I can see very important information, what I have done about those risks. So I see all my different mitigation actions here on the right-hand side. And the bad news in this demo example is that we're not looking across the board very good with our mitigation, because the completeness of my response actions, of my mitigations, is only slightly above 50%. And so is the effectiveness. So what I've done is not the most effective to reduce the risk. Now, I'm still looking at groupings of risks, so I could drill even further and jump to the risk details here and see the individual risks. So here I see my top 5 risks, and I see the residual total loss to be expected by risk owner. So now, as a senior manager, I know exactly who in the organization I need to go to and talk about the onset and development of these risks and what could be done about those risks. Now, of course, there's lots more information here on the slide, but I want to keep the presentation today short, which is why I want to stop the demo here and go back to the slides. So you will also find that in the follow-up material, what I just showed you, and move directly on. So now that we understand what the risk is and high level what the mitigation is, maybe we want to drill deeper into the mitigation. And that, of course, leads us directly to company policies, internal controls, compliance activities. And our environment is depicted here, where we again provide the end-to-end processes from the documentation of your control environment all the way to the planning of your performance of your controls, as well as the testing and evaluation of your controls. Then, of course, the physical execution of all of that activity in your control environment, and evaluating whether any of the controls are having issues, possibly material issues, including a complete remediation process to fix any mitigation actions that are not working in a timely manner. And of course, continuous monitoring and reporting across that platform. Again, I want to emphasize here that, of course, we can automate a lot of that. So, of course, we support the traditional way of doing internal controls so that you can test your controls following a test plan. But the important thing is you can automate, and especially of times of remote work, that becomes even more important, that you can let the system do certain control performance and control testing steps, and you as a business user will only be notified if and when something went wrong, and otherwise the system is doing the control performance and testing for you in the background. Now let's start at the top. If as a manager I wanted to know where we stand here, I can see across my various divisions and departments which controls have already been assessed, which ones have not been assessed. For example, for effectiveness, I can also, of course, look in other criteria. Are the controls properly designed? What's the self-assessment by the business? So I can get very quickly an overview where I stand as a manager. If I'm responsible for a particular department, then for my area of responsibility, I get these dashboards where I can see all my tasks. Here, for example, on the third column, I have my calendar, and I see that I missed a few controls here, which were actually due last Friday. And I see that some are due today. So I need to jump on those and make sure those controls are properly performed or tested, depending on what is necessary. In this case, we're talking about a test. I can also see that some of the controls my department is responsible for are overdue. That's not good. And I can see which ones are currently in process. So let's dive deeper into those that are in process and look in detail. I can see 3 controls are currently being processed by my staff. I can see how many steps of each control test has been done. So here we are evaluating whether the control is actually working. For example, a control on exchange rate updates, which is a very basic control. And I'm really only going to show you what we call the manual way of testing. So this is being put in front of a human being by workflow. We route that to the owners of the various steps. You see here the test is not yet completed, therefore the test status is in draft. And under general information, I can see that the first test step was done. This was purely a step. This was to select a suitable sample of exchange rates that should be reviewed, whether they've been properly updated. And then in the second step, we have done an initial test on those and it passed. But what is now missing is the final step where we overall assess this control, whether we deem it is working or it is not working. And before, as a control tester, I make that decision, of course, I want to see how the control was performed, how the exchange rates in this case have been updated. And right here on the screen, I have the information on the control performance. I can see that in Q1 it was performed. And I can see here the individual performance steps, which were done, as you can see further on here on the right, by Tim Brown. He updated or entered the exchange rates, and he also compared them to the foreign exchange site. So this should make me feel very good, very comfortable. And of course, further evidence could have been attached here. So further documents that I could review so that I can now go back and sign off on that control and say, yes, that is working. We have correct exchange rates in our systems. Now, that was a very basic manual control. I want to give you 2 examples of way more sophisticated controls and come back to some of the restart objectives and restart risks that I talked about at the beginning of today's presentation. The first one's about third-party screening. You may remember in the area of supply chain that we had an objective of being flexible so that we can adjust our sourcing strategy quickly. And not only there, also in distribution, we may deal with a number of partners, brokers, agents, as well as even on the customer side, we may have new customers and we may want to screen our third parties. And there is a control that we are providing, we call it business integrity screening, that allows you to screen, of course, third parties. You can even combine that master data screening with a transaction screening. So you can also look at what kind of transactions are you doing with these parties once you've signed them up. But here we are in the initial step, and you see that we are considering a new partner called Olson Partner Capital Management Corporation. And we ran that in our control against a number of screening lists. This could be your own blacklist that you have created in your business. But it could also be external blacklists that you obtain from governments or other agencies that provide these, be it sanction party lists, be it adverse media lists. And now we are comparing here in this control, this particular partner, Olson Partner Capital Management, and it finds a hit on that list called Olson Partner Capital Management. So yes, this partner is at least of concern. And we can even further see which subholdings it has. So in this case, we see it has a subholding called Falcon Blue Stain. And let's assume we as a business never want to have any business with Falcon Blue Stain. So we could stop right here and stop signing that particular organization up. Now, I showed you the screening of organizations. Of course, we can also do the same thing for individuals. So here we have Muhammad Ibrahim. And as we screen this person against our lists, we find a close but not exact match of Muhammad Nafi Ibrahim. And that, of course, is some concern. And we could now drill into the address and further attributes to establish that that's a person that is on one of the blacklists. But our system has also revealed that this is actually just an alias name. The person usually goes by the name of Ayman al-Zawahiri and is a well-known terrorist. And you see also the organization that he is involved with, like the Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb or the Salafist group for preaching and combat. Now, I know that's a very drastic example. Hopefully you will never find something like that. But I think it shows how you can find not just the entity that you're screening for, but also related entities. Now back to the controls that I wanted to share. That was the one about third-party screening. I also wanted to share with you how we can help in the area of cybersecurity. You may remember me talking about being a more distributed organization, having more people working from home, etc., and increasing the risk of a cyber attack, especially on your corporate business, on the, if you will, crown jewels of information that you store in business systems like SAP systems. And what I want to show you here is our enterprise threat detection control that helps in that area. It basically provides event monitoring and correlation of events to identify attack patterns, anomalous user behavior, etc. What you see here is just one of many screens from that tool. It's what I would call the data center monitoring screen, where you can see the events over time. You can see the events by system. You can see the events by different log file type, the alerts per system, etc., etc. And of course, you can drill into that. Now, picture this information as one drill down information from the digital boardroom that I showed you before. Imagine if you can embed cyber risk information at the enterprise level with the business context. And this is exactly what we do here. This is at a technical term, this is a security incident and event management system. And you will say, but we got one of those or several of those already at our organization. And my response would be, yes, exactly. I'm sure you have. But what we hear and what we experienced in SAP internally is that these systems typically treat business systems like an SAP ERP or S/4HANA system as a black box. And what we're trying to do here with our solution is to open that black box, to let you see inside if there is any critical incidents going on in your system, if there is the preparation for a persistent threat going on, and it allows you to stop that early on. So it is a security incident and event management system that helps you to detect, analyze, and neutralize attacks on the business information before the real damage occurs. It runs on the HANA database and allows you to store huge quantities of log data from various log files and correlate them. Even allows you to go back in time and compare what was the picture this Friday as opposed to last Friday, and identify anomalies that way. We have over 120 customers already making use of this solution and its key capabilities, which include the capturing of log information from SAP systems specifically. We capture it in a way that you can't turn off the log file, so you can't turn off that stream of information that is vital to identify critical events. We also provide what we call normalization of information, so we enrich the log event information with information like from which system is it coming from, etc., etc., and help you to correlate this information. And a single SAP system already has various different log files. You can add non-SAP log files like from a firewall to that to really get a comprehensive picture. And we also associate semantic events. So you can just go here and say, show me, for example, all the unsuccessful logins and then you only see those log events, and you can drill in further and say, show me those login events per terminal, and then you say, show me per user. And if you suddenly find one terminal, one end computer in your network where there have been 20 failed login attempts within an hour on various different user accounts, I think your suspicion level will rise that something unusual is going on in that area. Now, we also ship with that tool in a bi-monthly rhythm the latest cyber attack patterns. So you get constant updates from us. What are the most critical attack patterns on system? And of course, not shown here on the screen, we also provide a very intuitive graphical way for you to build your own attack patterns and put them into the monitoring screen so that they are continuously followed up. So we call that threat hunting or forensic analysis that you can do. Of course, you can enrich that with machine learning. There is many, many more capabilities that we have here, but in the interest of time, I stop here. That was my second control example, this time on cybersecurity. And we come back to the third main area after looking at risks, after looking at controls. Now I want to look on the audit side. And of course, here we provide, again, an end-to-end audit process year-round, starting in the beginning with managing the audit activity, which is critical, especially in times of post-pandemic, because you need to be, as an auditor, as an internal auditor, you need to be able to very quickly adopt and adjust your audit plans. And this tool will exactly allow you that, including the planning of audit engagements, performing the audit engagements, communicating the results, and of course, again, monitoring the progress. Now, I want to take a step back and show you an automated internal control, but then also show you how an auditor can remotely supervise that the control environment is working. So let's start with an automated control. Here we have the control for check for goods delivered, but not invoiced yet. And in our control environment, we, as the control owner, but also as the auditor later on, we can see under the evaluation tab that the automated performance of that control revealed that there are deficiencies. And we can see here that this control is linked to this particular ERP system and continuously screens that system. And it has found 100 high-level exceptions, which is why we see here on the left-hand side this failure indicator. If I click on that failure indicator, as a control performer, I get all the details. I see the individual deliveries that have not yet been invoiced. I see the PGI, the post-goods invoice status. I see the billing status, etc., etc. Now, the system also automatically has already created here an issue, which you find under the Issues tab. In this case, already assigned to an owner, Julie Armstrong, to ensure that there is a timely resolution of those issues that we have identified. Now, that's how automated controls work. You don't have to do anything. The system is constantly screening your underlying ERP systems, and if it finds issues, it will notify the corresponding owner, in this case, Julie Armstrong. But if you're an auditor, you can just go in and, for example, look at reports like the issue status. And you see here across the different columns for a certain department, for a certain sub-process, for certain controls, the issues that have been surfaced. And in particular, you can see whether the issues are still in submitted mode, means they have been raised, but nobody has looked at them, whether they are in draft, in process, or in closed. And here is the issues that we saw before from the goods delivered but not invoiced control. And we see that this is currently submitted, but not yet addressed. And so as an auditor, I get a first picture of a potentially remote location, let's say in Japan, where they stand, whether the controls are regularly running, whether they surface issues, and whether the issues are being addressed in a timely manner. That is very important information for me as an auditor working remotely. And furthermore, I can drill into the issues. I can go to the attachments and links area of my issues screen, And here I can directly open up any supporting documentation that the control performer or tester may have left for me, so I can get a very good picture remotely what is going on and whether it's worth to further investigate and audit this area, or whether I close this audit because everything looks okay and I move on to my next audit on my annual audit plan. Now, I hope that was a few illustrative examples for you. Now, the question is, how does that play out in the real world? How do customers actually use that? And I wanted to show you the example of one customer, and of course, a customer who implemented that before Corona already. So I'm not arguing they just did that in the last 2 months. But I think it's very helpful to understand how, if you will, the two sides of the coin, going back to the picture that I showed you at the beginning of my presentations, come together. So here we have the picture how the company is being managed. You see the various objectives that they have that form the strategy and ultimately flow into their operating plan. And they have actually 3 management systems. They have an operational management system called OMS. They have a financial management system, FMS, and a people management system, PMS. And of course, they get reporting out of that, review the performance, and may make adjustments to their business strategy. That is, if nothing happens. But in the real world, we always have risks that interfere with our objectives, which is why they added the SAP solutions for 3 lines of defense, which you see here added to the picture. And what you can see is that they are now identifying on a continuous basis the risks, including the new risks from the pandemic, which stand against the organizational and process objectives that they have. They then need to assess those risks. In its simplest form, they need to determine, are these high, medium, or low risks? But of course, our solution allows for a lot more sophistication, all the way to a quantified assessment if you wish to do that. And then once we know what our exposure is, and if it exceeds our risk appetite, we need to mitigate. And there are, of course, controls, there can be policies, and there can be other risk action plans, which need to be integrated into the business processes, so that your first line of defense, the people out in the business, in your departments and operations, that they get supported by these controls. Think, for example, of this automated control that tells you where you have deliveries but not invoiced yet. That can be very helpful in operations. If you get management by exceptions, notifications, if that happens. Now, you also need to know whether those controls are working. So you may do control self-assessments, you may do policy acknowledgements and other certifications, and also, again, use the automated capabilities that I showed you. And that leaves you with a picture of what your risk exposure is and how you are mitigating. And that also flows into setting and adjusting your overall strategy. And hopefully that illustrates how the SAP solution toolset in the area of 3 lines of defense can support your business. Now, how do you get there quickly? For that, I want to turn it back to Patrick from Turnkey to give you a few thoughts that can accelerate the path of getting this into your business. Patrick?
Thanks a lot, Michael. So you already mentioned the automation is a key, so that to reduce the enforcement on the worker capabilities for the controls by itself. So, and we are from Turnkey providing a control automation library, which accelerate the implementation for the different kind of clients. So we have a quite broad area of the automation topics, starting from order to cash to treasury, HR, and of course IT, where we strongly analyzing the different kind of logs. So if we're going to the next slide, we see how could we improve this overall process. For sure, it's also possible to manually configure or define these control automation, but using the Turnkey automation library enhance the overall process by 50%. And also we are aggregating or leveraging the automation factor by also 40%. So these are really a deep accelerator of the different kind of compliance topics. So if you want to have, if you go to the next slide, if you want to have a more detailed demo with a tailor-made view on the different kind of areas where we have these automations are already in place, then please feel free to contact us after the session or just write us an email.
Thanks, Patrick. I think very helpful information to get started. That was pretty much what we wanted to present today. Let me just quickly summarize what we said. First of all, of course, we all run our core business processes and we need to restart our core business processes. And historically, I think if we wanted to know about risk control audit information, it was a very manual process, very much separated from the core business process, where we use a variety of tools. And I think the most prominent ones are Excel and email, but maybe you're also using some further reporting tools, some user management tools, some workflow tools, some portal tools. But it is ultimately a slow and manual process that is also, because of its nature, of its fragmentation, a very slow and unreliable information, late information that, especially in times of change, may be too late to adjust for the changing environment. What we are proposing here instead, and SAP is in the lucky position to offer both pieces. Of course, we offer the core business processes, so you can run them reliably on our business platform, be it S/4HANA or our traditional ERP system, order to cash, procure to pay, hire to retire, just as examples of business processes. And in these processes is a lot of valuable information, and even controls are embedded in those processes. I just mentioned the three-way match in the procurement area, which is part of the core processes. Now, as a single vendor, we can extend that information out into a single unified GRC platform where all components, from risk management to internal controls, compliance, policy management, and internal audit, are integrated across these disciplines, but also with the underlying business system, so that you get one standardized and harmonized set of information. So imagine all your GRC processes running on a single repository of transactions in a harmonized user interface. So all you see is one Fiori Launchpad where you access the core process information and the risk and control information. Picture the digital boardroom example that I showed you before. And we can enrich that, of course, with intelligent technologies such as machine learning, predictive analytics, robotic process automation, and so forth. What I'm getting at is that that unified platform provides a single version of the truth in real time, which is really key at this stage of our economy, giving the people in your business a GRC management by exception. So a lot of the steps can be executed automatically, and they will only be notified if and when something is wrong. And that platform should help to reliably achieve business objectives and allow you also to restart successfully. Few points to take home. Just to recap, restart, we said, is a time of change, and change requires the tools and guidelines to manage and mitigate the associated risks that come with it. We also need to ensure risk and control information is always up to date, transparent, and reliable. That is, of course, key internally to manage our business successfully, to navigate the complications of a restart. But it is equally important to the external stakeholders. And I think most companies are already providing that information anyway to their shareholders and stakeholders. But of course, the SEC in the US was the first authority that already issued a notice, and I gave you the link at the bottom of the screen, where they make it very clear that organizations need to assess and disclose the evolving impact of COVID-19 to all their shareholders. So it's also important in that respect. Now, we talked about the remote work. We talked about that there may be fewer people who need to do the same job, and that's where automation becomes really critical. And we need to come to a stage where we can automate daily activities so that we sustainably self-correct, or you could say where we run certain processes by themselves and we only need to interfere if and when something goes wrong. So that's the basis, I think, also for a successful remote work. And as I showed in the most recent slides, we have all data in one place, the business information as well as the risk control audit information, consistent. There is no more fragmentation, up to date, to allow for, if you remember that picture of the two sides of a coin, to really allow for that risk adjusted, avoiding the fragmentation and duplication of work, and ultimately helping you with a successful restart. Thank you very much for listening. I now turn it back to Patrick for the questions.
Thanks, Mike. This was a great insight to the overall topic. So, and we already have some questions and some time for answering them. So, yeah, COVID is currently a very, very hot topic. So, and from your perspective, how does SAP support the solving of the risk which are related directly to COVID?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've taken a number of steps internally and changed some of our operating, which is why you also see us today on a remote session, for example. But it is exactly the tools that I showed you that we provide that we use internally, of course, first of all, but that we also provide to our customers. Just think of the example of cybersecurity. It is truly something that we identified internally, that opening, as I said, the black box of what's going on inside your ERP system and what could constitute a suspicious behavior. That was something that we needed to add to the cybersecurity mix. I'm not saying we're the only cybersecurity software provider. There's lots of valuable solutions out there. They all have their own right, but I think we focus specifically on the things that help with a business application like an ERP system.
Yeah, that's quite important. I have a second question here. From your experience over the years, how important is, from your perspective, the automation of tasks and controls?
Yeah, I think I already alluded to that in the presentation. I always thought it is very, very important. We recently, one of our last conferences that we were able to run early March this year, we asked actually the audience what percentage of risk and control information they perceive could be automated. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it was a significant percentage. I think we're talking 60 to 80%. And then we asked how much is really automated, and they said very, very little is automated. So I think it's an area that has been neglected in previous years, simply because we had the manpower and we had our entrenched ways of doing things. But I think right now in this situation, and I don't want to come back to what I mentioned several times before, the remote work, which is just one aspect of that, getting to a way where we run more sustainably, or have certain processes that run more or less by themselves, and we only need to pay attention if and when something goes wrong, becomes more important than in the past. But even independent of COVID, I think this automation makes a lot of sense. I've seen that with customers where initially you have sort of an antagonistic relationship between the GRC folks in a business and the business people. And when the business people understand that we can feed valuable information to them, such as you've delivered goods but overlooked invoicing them, we don't need to create a big splash about that. It doesn't have to go to internal or external audit. If we mid-year tell responsible business managers that there's something starting to go wrong. If we catch something at its root, it can be quickly and quietly fixed without a big damage. And that is, I think, the ultimate benefit of automation, that you can see a lot more things in a lot more granularity, in a lot higher frequency.
That's right. That would be definitely a major improvement for lots of companies. That's right. So, and I have the last question here. It's more, you already mentioned it, to bring the data in one place. What is so the listeners are really interested of what would be the first steps if you have the data in different buckets, and what would be the great or the best approach to bring them all in one place, that you have an overview of the risk and security related data in one view?
Well, as always, I would use two guidelines. I think, first of all, I would look at what is my most critical information, what are my most critical processes. That's where I would start. That's sort of a top-down, if you will, risk-based approach to where I would start. But I would also look in my business, where do I have, initially at least, people on the business side who are cooperating, who are willing to go that way with the GRC department, with the risk controls folks, so that you have an initial case study inside your business where you can prove the value of the solution, and then expand from there out into further areas of the business using that internal proof case that you've built.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great approach. Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael. And thanks for all of you joining us today. Please remember, other sessions will be available for registration on our website. And for sure, the previous session will be available on demand. Thanks again to listening. And if you want to get in touch with us, our details are on the screen. And you can contact us by email or by the form. Feel free. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.